enzymes. You remember that, which is like agarase. And then we also discussed the freeze-thaw method. But then, and then we also discussed the column-based method. Like you can use Eka columns. And the last method is electroelution. What happens is that you can elute the DNA, right? You can elute the DNA with the help of, you just apply voltage to it. So the way it is done is, so I'll explain you the concept and then I'll show you the figure. So the way it is done is, we know that the DNA has negative charge, correct? Now, right, so the DNA will migrate from negative to positive side, right? So the basis of electroelution lies in this basic principle, that what you can do is, the desired fragment or the desired band which you want to cut, right, and elute the DNA out, so this DNA fragment can be cut with a sharp surgical blade, right? Now you put this DNA which is embedded in the agarose, right? So put this gel slice containing the DNA into a bag which is actually called as dialysis bag. So what is called as a dialysis bag. Now in the dialysis bag, what we put, this buffer, what we do is we put the gel slice inside the bag. Okay. You place this dialysis bag which is sealed from both the ends. You can use a simple rubber band, or you can use, there are plastic clips which can be used for sealing the dialysis bag from both the ends, and then you put it in a horizontal gel assembly. What you do is you turn the current on. The moment you turn the current on, the DNA will start migrating from the gel, right, from negative electrode to positive electrode, and during this process the DNA will come out from the gel slice and would come in the buffer solution which is present in the dialysis bag. Right, so in this method what will happen is, there is almost, I would say, 99% recovery or even 100% recovery, because in this case the elution is based upon the migration of DNA out from the gel. So therefore, when we talk about electroelution class, in electroelution, irrespective of the size, the efficiency of elution is extremely good, because you don't have to worry that there is, okay, so let me write it down. So here the method is applicable to any sizes of DNA, right? It can be genomic DNA, it can be plasmid DNA, it can be digested DNA, it can be a fragment of restriction enzyme cleaved DNA. Any size of DNA can be eluted. There is no contamination coming from agarose, because in this case the agarose will remain there intact, and it's just the DNA which has come out, and this agarose, these agarose particles, if they come in the solution, then they sometimes inhibit the restriction digestion or ligation or gene cloning reactions. So therefore in this case there is no contamination from agarose, and the DNA comes in solution. Buffer, right? So what you can do is you just open the dialysis bag, in the dialysis bag and then collect the DNA containing solution with a pipette tip. Then further you can do phenol fluoroform purify. During this process you are actually purifying, that means you are removing the salts and any other impurities, but otherwise the DNA is more or less pure. So this particular figure shows how the method actually works. So this is there is a kit which is developed by GE Biosciences and they call it as G capsule or G pick. So this is developed for electroelution. So in this case what they have done is they have a small plastic apparatus which is very tiny. It's called G capsule and G capsule has two components, G pick for picking the protein or nucleic acid bands and G trap for trapping the proteins or nucleic acids. So G pick is, as the name itself says, it's used for picking up and G trap is for collection. So the way it is constructed is it has very sharp edges. The edges are very sharp like a blade. So what you can do is once the gel is complete, now see the middle figure. So once the gel run is complete, you use G pick and then you just press it hard on the gel. So this way the gel will come inside the G pick, right? Inside this. Now what you can do is you can place the G pick like this and then the collection tank will be here, and then when you will turn the current on, the DNA will actually be collected in the collection port. So instead of a dialysis bag, they have suggested that you can use this kind of device where you have an assembly for picking up and then something for collection, right? Is it clear? Electroelution.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this part finishes the methods of gene isolation. So we started with southern blotting using probe, performing hybridization. Once you perform hybridization, you are going to run duplicate gels, right? You are going to place the membrane alongside the gel. Then you are going to cut the band and then elute the band for isolation of the gene of interest. For the isolation of the gene of interest, you will start with isolation of genomic DNA, restriction digestion, Agarose gel electrophoresis, in duplicate, followed by southern blotting, followed by hybridization with the probe which is specific to the gene, correct? Once you do this, then you are going to align the membrane along with the second gel, and then you are going to cut the band and then elute the band with the help of any of the methods which we discussed till now: electroelution, column based method, freeze thaw method, or enzymatic method. So hope this method, this whole process of isolating gene is clear using restriction enzyme digestion. And once this gene is isolated, this can be used for further cloning experiments, which I'll be discussing in a while. Maybe not in today's class.
Ma'am, just one question.
Yes.
Uh, when we use probe, so ma'am, what is the maximum length a probe can have?
Okay,
Like
so the maximum length, so the minimum length, as I told you, for hybridization is 25 base pairs. The maximum length can be even, so people even use the whole plasmid as a probe. So even the entire plasmid of 4 kb or 6 kb can be used as a probe. But the problem is the experiment. What is the experiment that you are planning to perform? So for example, if your experiment is to identify a plasmid, right? So in this case you can actually use plasmid as a probe, correct? But for example, if your material is genomic DNA, right? And for genomic DNA, now the class is aware of key, the more the length is, the chances of occurrence in the genomic DNA is likely to increase. You remember that? So shorter DNA fragments will be present many at multiple places. You remember, like 6 base pair sequence will is likely to be present after every 4096 base pair, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So the problem is that the probe has to be very specific. Probe has to be very specific. So it cannot be this small that it is likely to present so frequently, and it cannot be this large. So the problem is, if it is too small, it will be present at many places. If it is too large, then also it is a problem, because if it is too large, it is likely to contain many short sequences of homology. The probe is too large. For example, if we have used a 6 kb fragment, then the chances of it being so specific is also less, because it may contain shorter regions of homology within it. Is it making sense or no?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, like I read a paper, like in that they have described, like they are using 100 kb fragments to, in fish as a probe, and that probe can even be like 8 MB base pairs. So I
Yes.
was thinking, like, how is that possible that that will hybridize? Like, so they are like, they have described, like, if once it binds, starts hybridizing, it just goes like a chain, and it can hybridize any sequence. But in
Right.
that, it's like,
But
how do you determine and prepare like so big a probe, and how will we using it is applications and
no, so such a big probe can be easily prepared. So there is a method which is called as, maybe you will learn this method in detail in recombinant DNA technology, but the method that is used is called, so there is a kit, or there is a Clenopolymerase is the one which actually is used for sealing the nicks. So Clenopolymerase, okay, so
they had used it for like a fish sequencing, uh, fish CQ. Their method is.
yeah, say it again.
I am saying that they have used in fish sequencing.
Fish sequencing,
Yes.
fluorescence in situ
Oligo fish
hybridization, or
sequencing.
real fish, zebra fish or something.
Yes, ma'am. Something like that.
Okay.
It was there.
So, right. So let me tell you. So there are ways to make probes of larger DNA, and larger DNA, as I told you, can be used. You can use, people do use bigger fragments as probes, but then in that case, you can have background as well. So you will not have, I mean, you will have to do a lot of washing to get rid of the background, but then you can have, I mean, people do use, even if you will see some of my older papers, even we use the entire plasmid as a probe, which was like 7-8 kb. So people do use bigger fragments, bigger plasmids as probes, and like you said, even 100 kb. So all these can be used as probe, and preparing such a big probe is not a problem. There are enzymes. So the way the method works is key, you create nicks in the plasmid, and then these nicks are actually uh, replicated, right? The DNTPs are incorporated, and in this case the DNTPs are incorporated using radioactive labeled DNTPs, and therefore wherever there is a nick, there will be an incorporation of a radioactive DNTP, and therefore the whole plasmid or whatever fragment of interest gets labeled. So instead of, there are two types of labeling, one is end labeling and one is like labeling throughout. So in end labeling, you just label one end of the DNA. So this is not a good method when you are using, when you are preparing larger probes. But when you are preparing larger probes, you can actually label the entire probe. And for that you create nicks, and then try incorporating radio labeled or fluorescently labeled DNTPs, so that the entire probe fluoresces. And for that, the enzyme used is actually glenopolymerase, but I removed gleno because glenopolymerase is actually DNA polymerase 1 of E. coli. But I think we will discuss the details in the later classes. Let's not confuse the class. And also the other ways of preparing probe you are going to learn in the course recombinant DNA technology.
Ma'am, like my question was that if that big sequence is there, then they are hybridizing in situ, not outside the cell.
Not outside the cell. Oh, so then this is not southern. This is DNA hybridization.
Yes, ma'am. They are like fish. We use inside the cell hybridization, right?
So there are different names, so don't confuse. So when you are doing inside hybridization, that means you are actually trying to observe something, right? So then in that case, you are using cells, whole cells. But when you are performing the process under in vitro conditions, then in that case, actually, we perform hybridization like the way I told you, southern blotting and hybridization. The purpose of the two experiments are completely different. Nothing to do whether it is fish or whether it is human or whether it is bacteria. Southern blotting and hybridization is an in vitro technique, works for all the methods, whether you want to isolate the gene from fish or from humans or from anything. The method would work. The only thing is when it is a eukaryotic system, instead of genomic DNA, you are going to use what? I told you. Let's see. Ashi Ratnesh.
Ma'am, what did you ask?
Ma'am, could you please repeat the question?
Oh, so the question was, southern blotting and hybridization is a technique used for isolating the the gene or the DNA, right? And I told you that you can use bacterial DNA, fish DNA, human DNA, any DNA. So my question is, the starting sample for human or fish is going to be what? Is the question clear or no?
Ma'am, I didn't understood. But like mRNA can be.
So I told you that for isolating the gene, right, because you have introns and exons, you cannot use genomic DNA. So in this case, when you are talking about fish or when you are talking about humans, so in this case, usually if the target is to isolate a gene, then in fact you can actually use cDNA for hybridization, which is prepared by reverse transcriptase.
Yes, ma'am. But like, ma'am, this technology that like using mRNA is just recently developed, right?
Not recently developed, quite old.
Ma'am, I was thinking like it is like in 2016, something like that. Uh,
Even in our department, you will find PhD thesis on this. Okay.
okay.
So then the next application, so hope gene isolation of gene using southern blotting is clear and the process of southern blotting is clear. So then the next
Yes, ma'am.
is restriction fragment length polymorphism or RFLP. So as the name itself says, restriction, that means we are going to use a restriction enzyme. Fragment, that means restriction enzyme on digestion results in a fragment. And length, that means the length of the fragment. And polymorphism means there is a variation in the length of the fragment created by restriction digestion. Got it? That is why the technique is called as restriction fragment length polymorphism. That means you have variations in length using the same restriction digest. So this technique is actually the basis of DNA fingerprinting or any other fingerprinting technique. So in this case, the idea is that in humans, we discussed in one of the very earlier classes that the DNA is kind of identical, but then there is a small percentage of DNA which is different, right? And then we also discussed the repetitive sequences. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Repetitive sequences contain satellite DNA, and if you remember, we discussed that these satellite DNA can be microsatellite, macrosatellite, you remember that, and mini satellite. So the number of repeats can vary. So the point I am trying to say is that the number of repeats, which is, if you remember, we discussed VNTR, which is variable tandem repeats. So this variable number tandem repeats comes from the fact that the number of repeats can actually vary in number in different individuals. So the point is, if we use the repeat region as probe, listen to me carefully, if we use the repeat region as probe, right, and then if you perform a restriction digestion, time this time, because you are not isolating a gene, we are actually looking for the non-coding DNA or the repetitive DNA. So in this case, you can use restriction digestion of genomic DNA, in fact human genomic DNA, right? And then what you will do is you will use the repeat region as probe. Then what you will find is that even twins or even two different individuals, you will find that the number of fragments which will appear will be different, right? So this is a representative diagram of RFLP. So in this case, for example, the technique can be used for solving multiple, it has multiple applications. It can be used for solving murder mysteries. It can be used for paternity test. It can be used for comparing a normal individual versus a deceased individual. It can be used for plants. It can be used for bacterial strains as well. For example, a plant which is exposed to stress, any kind of stress, versus a plant which is like growing under normal conditions, or a human which is exposed to stress versus a human which is like living in a normal environment, or a bacteria which is exposed to a heat shock or a cold shock or any kind of remediation stress versus a bacteria which is not exposed. So we can do all these analysis using this technique called RFLP. So if you see the figure on the left side carefully, so here the enzyme that is used is MST1. Let me make it big. So the enzyme that is used is MST1. The sites that are shown by the red arrow are the sites for the restriction enzyme MST1. The yellow portion is the portion which is shown for a normal individual, and the one at the bottom is the one where there is a disease, and as a result of the disease there is a mutation that has taken place, and this mutation has destroyed one of the restriction site over here. So in this case, what the authors have done is they have prepared a probe using this small region, and then they tried to perform digestion and then electrophoresis, and followed by blotting and hybridization. So in this case, the probe is a small region, correct? So in the case of a normal individual, if there are 3 MST1 sites, right, and then if the probe is small, so you are going to see these fragments, right? Whereas whereas in the deceased one, because one of the site is destroyed, you are going to see only one fragment. So that's the point over here. Is it clear or no? So when you run, so in the first gel, when you run, you are going to see multiple fragments because this is agarose gel electrophoresis. So you will see multiple fragments which will actually appear as a smear. But when we use the probe class, so when we use the probe, then because the probe is a small region, so the MST1 digested part. Class, are you people there or no? Ashir and Krish?
I'm
Yes, ma'am.
Let me see. Visha.
Yes, ma'am. We're here.
So is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that is why this technique. So now I'll show you quick videos for this. A few applications. Can you see it, class, or no?
Ma'am, I cannot see.
Not yet.
Not yet.
So I'll show you quick videos, 2 videos, and then
Now it is visible.
now it's visible.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a long video, 45 minutes, so I'm not going to play the entire one. I'll just show you in pieces the main part. Can you hear the sound or no?
Weapons might be
We
less
can
effective,
share.
sometimes not.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this talks about that you can use blood, you can use hair, you can use body fluids, or even skin cells.
Something else at times. So usually at this point, I also would ask, fingerprints is often the first thing people come up with. So just why do you think fingerprints are good evidence for sometimes other body fluids and skin cells? What do these things all have in common? If you think about it, these things all have in common that they might be a source of DNA. Now, like I said, for hair, it depends on how the hair was left at the scene of the crime. It has to have a little bit of that skin tag left on it.
So this video talks about how this can be used for solving the murder mystery.
And if you
So I'll straight away go to the experimental technique.
DNA, so the printout holds it up to look at something. And so ER1 would cut up into
Yes, this part I wanted you to see. Huh?
Okay. So what does this have to do with forensics? Well, since we know that these enzymes only cut in particular sequences, we can use them to determine if that particular sequence was present. So let me show you an example here. If you look at these series of letters, these bases, from two different individuals. At the top, we have person number 1, and beneath them we have person number 2. And in both of them, I've listed out 37 bases in a row. And if you look, you can see that they're mostly the same. Okay, so just like we have most of our DNA sequences shown in this, not quite 99.9% the same, we're looking at one of those regions where there's some differences. You can see that these two people have mostly the same DNA. All right, so let's imagine that we cut this DNA up with EcoR1. So I wrote there at the top, you can see EcoR1 enzyme cuts GAATTC, cuts between the DNA. Now, just for the sake of simplicity, I only listed one strand of DNA. But remember, DNA is double-stranded, so there would be another strand of letters right underneath each of these letters. that para, A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G. But let's just look at them as a single strand right now, just so we can kind of think about what would happen if we cut both of these people's DNA with GAA, with ECOR1 that cuts GAA-TTC. You might have noticed already, if you've been looking at this for a few seconds, that in person number 1, just a few base pairs in, we have ATTC, and then we have GAA-TTC. That's why we get cut by our enzyme. But we don't have that sequence in person number 2. After our ATTC, we have GGA-TTC. So that one's not going to be cut by ECOR1, just because of that one little change from A to G. So I have this illustrated on the next slide. Just put little blue lines anywhere where this DNA would have been cut by ECOR1. Okay? So, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. Take a look, see that I cut only where it says GAA-TTC, and not any of those other sort of imposter sequences that were piece on the left. Where our forensics comes in. Imagine that we took some blood just from human remains. We took the DNA out of that blood, and we cut it up with ECOR1 as an example. We see where the ECOR1 cut is in those 3 different spots where you see scissors. Now, when we do a crime scene investigation, which we don't do at the DNA Learning Center in real life, but we as a general statement, we always want to compare to the victim. If there was a victim of the crime, we want to make sure that we're not looking at their DNA. It might be helpful for us to know which DNA was theirs, but we also want to make sure that any piece of evidence that came from the victim, we don't try to match it to a suspect, because if it came from the victim, it could come from one of the suspects. Alright, so in this case, you can see there is one cut site that matches up there on the left, but then the other cut sites are different. So this victim's DNA doesn't have GAA-TTC in the same spots as our DNA evidence. So did our evidence come from the victim? No, in this case, it did not. So now we can compare it to some of our suspects. Alright, so if we look here at suspect 1 and suspect 2, which one do you think matches our DNA evidence based on this picture? Okay. So suspect 1 looks totally different, right? It didn't get cut the same number of times, and the cuts are in totally different spots. But how about suspect 2? Suspect 2 matches the DNA evidence exactly. So we would see that it has the same number of fragments, and the fragments will be the same size. So this suggests that this particular piece of evidence came from suspect 2. Now remember, just because a piece of evidence came from a particular suspect doesn't mean that person committed the crime, but this would be one piece of information that investigators would use to try and solve the crime, to try to figure out what happened. So we would say this piece of evidence came from suspect 2. Alright, but how do we actually see these little bits of DNA? So I've already cut up DNA with a restriction enzyme for you. And we don't need to see it though, because if you just look at a tube of DNA, I didn't bring a tube over here, but if you just look at a tube of DNA, it's going to look exactly the same before and after we do restriction digestion. That's what it's called when we cut up the DNA. So we need to do a special technique that allows us to see what size DNA we have. And that technique is called agarose gel electrophoresis. It's here in the top. And you'll notice right now as well, because this works exactly, they would get contaminated. Digestion. Liquid over top of the gel. Backbone. So this is like my screen, far away from the well. So no matter how far a motorcycle could find pieces of DNA like I have in this. See that dark colored dye is starting to move in this lab. But that one is John Doe. He's the husband of Jane, our victim. Suspect 2 is James Smith. He's a co-worker of Jane.
So hope the process is clear more or less, right? So you get a gel like this.
But you can see I have from evidence 1, evidence 2, and evidence 9. And then our victim, suspect 1, and suspect 2 are run on this job. So because this is a little bit overexposed, it's a little bit hard to see that evidence 1 and evidence 2 look the same, but I'll tell you that they are the same. Now, if we compare those to the victim, and we compare those to suspect 1 and we compare those to suspect history. Which of those patterns?
Use this. Okay. So hope RFLP is clear to everyone.
Ma'am, it is clear, but the thing was that voice was like echoing, not clear actually. So we will watch the video after when we'll find time.
Not a problem. But at least the method was clear. I did not show you that.
Ma'am, could you please provide a link for the video
Yes.
as well?
Right, I will copy the link in the PPT. So then, but I hope the method, the basic concept is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Based on-
Concept is like clear.
Okay. So before I switch to another application, because we were discussing blotting, southern blotting, and I told you that we can also use for RNA it is northern blotting, and for protein it is western blotting, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, you remember that? So just to finish with this key, whenever it is DNA, you are going to use the method.
Please share the slide.
Oh, acha, you cannot see. Right. So now can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then before I close, so actually for RNA and for DNA both, the method that are used are southern blotting for DNA, northern blotting for RNA, but then the basic principles of detection are exactly same. When we talk about protein, for protein actually the technique is called western blotting, and in this case the membrane that is used is actually nitrocellulose, PVDF membranes are used. You are going to run it on a page. You are going to perform polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis. You can run, in fact, STS page. And then what you do is you can transfer the gel membrane. Transfer the protein onto the membrane, and then the detection is through antibodies, specific primary antibody, and then secondary antibodies are used. But otherwise the principle is more or less, I mean, it also involves hybridization. So I thought I'll show you this as well quickly, because I do not think you will learn this in any other course later. So that's why I thought maybe I'll quickly introduce you. It will be a very short video. I'm not going to show you a long video. Can you see it, class?
Yes, ma'am. Now we can.
One second.
Western blotting is the most widely used technique for protein detection. In this video, we will cover the three main
Can you
steps
now?
to generate Western blot.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
After protein samples have been prepared, the mixture is separated by molecular weight using protein gel electrophoresis, which is a standard laboratory technique by which charged protein molecules are transported through a matrix by an electrical field. Once the proteins have been separated in the gel, they must be transferred to a solid support membrane, which facilitates protein detection through the use of antibodies specific to the target protein. Using a traditional apparatus, the protein transfer process can take 30 to 60 minutes to complete. However, new technologies have been developed that can cut the transfer time down to as little as 7 minutes. The membrane is now ready for detection. This is a multi-step process, and the first step is minimizing non-specific binding by using a blocking agent. The membrane should first be incubated with a protein-containing solution, such as non-fat dry milk, or a purified protein like bovine serum albumin, or BSA. Proteins in this blocking solution occupy the empty spaces on the membrane to help prevent detection antibodies in the next step from sticking to the membrane. Recent advancements in blocking agents have helped make this step faster and more efficient. Next, the membrane is incubated with the primary antibody specific to the target to allow the antibody to bind its target. Any unbound primary antibody is washed away. A secondary antibody that is specific to the primary antibody is then added. The secondary antibody is typically tagged with a reporter enzyme, like horseradish peroxidase or a fluorophore. As before, any unbound secondary antibody is washed away. If using an enzyme-based system, a few different substrates can be used, which produce either a colorimetric or chemiluminescent signal. Chemiluminescence detection is the method of choice in many protein laboratories, as it provides high sensitivity and convenience for detection with a film or digital imaging equipment. Today, more researchers are taking advantage of fluorescently conjugated secondary antibodies that eliminate the need for substrates and provides the ability to detect multiple proteins at the same time. Western blot imaging and documentation can be performed using an X-ray film for chemiluminescence detection, or increasingly with Western blot imaging systems equipped with charge-coupled device cameras. In summary, the Western workflow consists of 3 major steps. 1. Separate proteins by gel electrophoresis. 2. Transfer proteins from the gel to a solid support. And 3. Detect, where we use antibodies specific to the target protein to visualize the protein of interest. Depending on your experimental needs, there are reagents and equipment that can help optimize.
So Western blotting is more or less clear?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I guess then we are done with blotting, and then so I think we had discussed this already, like one of the applications of restriction endonucleases is restriction mapping, and then I have a few examples which you can try I mean at your home. So for example, you can actually develop a restriction map. So if you are given the information that with EcoR1 you are getting a 10 kb fragment, with BAMH1 it's 5 kb and 5 kb, and with EcoR1 plus BAMH1, which is double digestion, you are getting 5 kb, 3 kb and 2 kb. So then can we generate a restriction map, something like this, right? So likewise, this is another example. So I'll be emailing you, and I suggest that you people try doing it, and then if you have difficulties we can discuss this in the next class. But this involves simple mathematics like calculations of single digest, double digest and triple digest, and then preparing the map. So other than that, I think we are done with restriction endonucleases, and from tomorrow's class, I would like to start with PCR. And if you have studied PCR before, so PCR as a method for isolating the gene, and in fact PCR can be used not only for obtaining the gene, but PCR is used for preparation of probe, PCR is used in DNA fingerprinting, PCR is used in RFLP as well, and we are going to discuss this how all of these are used in the next class, in tomorrow's class. So we'll start with PCR. If you have studied this before, I suggest that you just go over it so that we can quickly finish the basics. And for